Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. All right, thanks for joining us today for the Story 516 podcast. I'm Zach, your host, and with me today is a good friend of mine, Josiah DeGraaf. Josiah, welcome.
Thank you, Zach. It's awesome to be on the podcast. I've been listening to this podcast since day one, and it's great to be on the other side of the recording studio today.
Awesome. Well, I've known you for a number of years now. We met through a program for writers and have just kind of stayed in touch, been in a couple other programs or classes together. And then last summer, we actually got to meet in person at a writers' conference, which was really fun.
That was like our first time in 6 years after knowing each other online.
Right, it was something like that. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was fun.
But I would love to have you just kind of introduce yourself, give a little bio. Who are you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a fantasy author and literature nerd. I grew up, loving epic fantasy worlds with imaginative worlds and authentic characters. So, Tolkien and Lewis would obviously be up there. McDonald, uh, big Christopher Paolini, Aragon fan back in the day. That just captured my imagination as a teen. Made me realize that, if I enjoy reading these books so much, this is, I would love to be able to write them long term. So I enjoy crafting fantastical stories about characters who face the same dilemmas we do when we try to do the right thing. And in addition to writing, a lot of my day job is working with young writers. I'm the program director of the Young Writers Workshop, which is a monthly membership program for writers in their teens and 20s who want to hone their craft and finish projects that they're proud of. I also do some marketing work for Story Embers. I write occasionally for Lorehaven magazine, and yeah, also enjoy doing things outside of work and writing as well. Always very down to play some great board games, or hike to gorgeous overlooks, or just enjoy a small town life over here nearby the rivers surrounding Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But yeah, that's a little bit about me and some of the different things that I do.
Well, one thing that I was really interested in was how you incorporate your faith into your writing. Because as long as I've known you, it's been an integral part of, at the very least, like motivation behind why you write. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, one of the things I love about God is how he encourages us to come to him with the big questions that we have. And we don't need to come to him knowing all the answers, or even knowing the right ways to always express them. you know, you look at the Psalms and times when David's just wrestling with God or almost yelling at God, and yet there's a faith that David still has, and God is willing to listen to us when we come to him with hard things, even when we don't know what's going on. And one of the things I love about stories is how stories also give us an opportunity to work through the difficult and the challenging things that we face in life. For myself as a reader, I'm looking for those stories that are grappling with the real problems that people in real life face, uh, even if it's being explored in a very fantastical environment. And as an author, that's one of the things that I seek to do in my stories. That while there might be cool world building and my characters might have some superhuman abilities, that the challenges that they're facing are very human problems and dilemmas that don't always have easy answers. And one of my goals as an author is just to explore with readers what are the challenges we face? Either the challenges that we face in general as human beings, or for Christian readers, what are the challenges that we face specifically as Christians? And I think that stories can be just a great way of exploring things because they give us a safer place to do it. It's not a situation where we're under pressure and we're under the gun to try and have a ready answer. It's something where we can see a character grappling with a similar situation, and we're able to just sit back and watch how do they approach this, and what are the consequences of the ways they approach this particular problem, whether they're positive or negative. And I think that stories just give us the opportunity to just explore and think through what does it look like to live in a way that's faithful as a Christian. And that's one of the things that I aim to do whenever I'm writing a story.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about kind of reminds me of there's a C.S. Lewis quote about stealing past watchful dragons. I will absolutely
Yeah.
100% butcher the quote if I try to quote it right now. But the idea behind it is that sometimes talking about like just theology without or sometimes just talking about theology can almost be overwhelming, or it just has this like I think he uses like the phrase like stained glass in terms of like this reverence that you need to approach it. But then if you can place those like topics within a story, you can almost get past those constructions that we create in our own heads and maybe experience like what God's trying to tell us more vibrantly for
Right.
some people. And I think he did that in Narnia for a lot of people as kind of like the Christian example of fantasy.
Yeah, and it's interesting, well, this is a bit of speculation, there's a lot of people who talk about the fact that, well, why did C.S. Lewis begin writing fiction? Well, he'd been writing nonfiction for years, but there is then this critic who really just tore apart and poked a lot of holes into some of the different nonfiction pieces he was writing. And I've read Lewis's nonfiction pieces. I think they're brilliant, but it seems like there's this pivot he did when he was getting a lot of intense criticism. There were things that maybe he felt like, well, maybe I need to explore this more. And where did he go? Well, he went to stories, and now he went them to write the stories, which is a different experience than reading them. But I think either way, stories just have this incredible ability to give us just a lower pressure environment to be able to think through things. Partially because, as you said, we're being entertained, and it's able to slip past those watchful dragons.
Yeah, the other example from my own life where stories really just kind of opened my eyes in a different to see kind of the world in a different way was I was traveling for a friend's wedding who was like I live in America and my friend was getting married in Canada. So it was like a 16-hour drive. So not completely different cultures, but we were hanging out with a completely different set of people. And it was interesting seeing how quickly people started engaging with each other and talking with each other over the common, like the shared experience of movies or books or stories that they're all familiar with. And it just kind of opened my eyes that this is a bridge. It's kind of the common narrative of our culture is telling stories.
Right, and I think there's something just about stories that when we engage in a good story, even if we were watching it alone or reading it alone, we want to share our experience with others. We want to find that friend and be like, "You really need to read this book." And after they've read this book, it said, I really want to talk with you about this book and what it's like afterward. And there's something that's missed in the process of engaging with stories when we're always doing it by ourselves, and just something that can be very life giving when we're able to go through it with others.
Yeah, yeah. So, as a writer and a writing mentor, are there different ways you've seen God show up like a different like different experiences where you've seen God at work in kind of a different way that a lot of people might not naturally like think of.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting how God is able and willing to use words. We see obviously him doing this in Genesis when he's just speaking the universe into being by the use of words. We also see this in the way that he often chooses to use our words to be able to shape and impact others. A couple weeks ago, I was with my company at a big homeschool convention in Cincinnati, Ohio. And one of the cool things about running an online program is that I think pretty much every convention I've gone to the past 3 years, there's always at least a couple people coming up to me saying, "Oh, I'm one of the students in the Young Writers Workshop, and I know who
Nice.
you are." And there's a lot that's just very fun about that. And at the convention Cincinnati, there was this writer and her mom who came up to our booth, and the mom shared with me, she was like, we joined the Young Writers Workshop program about a year ago, and I can't tell you not only the difference this has made for my daughter's writing life, but just the rest of her life and how she approaches school as a whole. It's just been transformational for her. And we talk with a lot of writers who, once they join the program, their writing lives are transformed. They're suddenly writing more, finishing projects, doing more with it. But I think it's an interesting question of, well, why is it that for some students it's not just about doing more with their writing, but it's also just transformative for their lives? And one of the things that we really focus on as a program is the fact that I think often teen writers' only experience with writing is writing for school, right? You're writing essays and book
Yeah.
reports and things
Yeah.
that basically only the teacher reads, right? And that could just be, it can make writing feel like something very academic that you do. That's just something that you do for school. And one of the things we really focus on the program is that no, writing can be so much more than just an academic pursuit. Whether you're writing articles or blog posts to go up somewhere on the internet, or whether you're writing a short story or a novel or something you hope to eventually have people read. Now, sometimes this can come across as, oh well, maybe that's only relevant if I want to become a professional writer, but I really don't think that's the case, because one of the things that we really try to highlight with our students is the fact that writing is something that's going to help you in so many different ways in life. And it's not just professionally, but it's also in your personal lives. It's ability to be able to know, how do I, when I'm hanging out with friends, how do I tell them a story or something I've learned about in my life in an engaging way? Or if I've learned something, how do I write some blog post or article or even just a social media post that's able to share what God's been doing in my life with others and express that in a way that's poignant and meaningful, and that just grabs the reader? Or in fiction, maybe you're not going to ever write a novel that is published by some big publishing house, but maybe you just write a short story. It's meaningful to you that you're able to share with a few people in your life. Maybe it's your friends, maybe it's your kids, and you're able to both entertain them and just show them a different side of the world, and help to just build that empathy, understanding, as we're looking at some situation from that relaxed perspective that we were talking about earlier. And when we're doing that, it's remarkable how often God comes and decides to work through those words. I think for the student that and their family that I talked with at the convention, one of the big things for her was realizing that, wow, my writing can actually be used to impact others even while I'm a teen. And suddenly, schoolwork isn't just something I'm doing to check off boxes. It becomes meaningful because I see how this connects with my everyday life and with my passions and what I want to be doing. And while in the writing world, often it's the big successes that are most remarked on. It's this person published this book, or they got this article published on this major website, or something like this. You know, what I tend to be most proud of with the students that we work with, are those who talk about the fact that I was able to write this letter to my mom or to my friend who's going through a hard time, and I was able to bring them some hope and some light, and I can see how God used what I wrote to touch someone that I know personally. And I think it's just so exciting to see that, and just it can be both a weight and a joy at sometimes, but just an honor to see how God will stoop to allow us to use our words, um, to show his love and his kindness to others.
That's really great. It reminded me of that verse about not letting anyone look down on you because you're young. And I mean that's a really core aspect of, I think, the young writer do hard things kind of organization where you can do great things for God at any age.
Yeah. And doing great things for God doesn't need to be the big flashy stuff either. It
Right.
can just be those normal things that might not appear much to the world, but that really are great in God's eyes. Earlier this week I was reading Orthodoxy by G.K.
Yeah.
Chesterton, and he had an interesting line in there. He said, the things common to all men are more important than the things peculiar to all men. He says, falling in love is more poetical than dropping into poetry. While we talk about big things like discovering the North Pole, or being this great astronomer, or being this great musician, one of the things that he mentioned is that really what most moves us isn't those big things. It's the common experiences that we have, you know every day in life, right?
Right.
You
Right.
don't need to be trying to be some great writer for your words to be able to be used by God. And sometimes it's those the very common uses of words that are more remarkable than the big ones.
I really like that. It really changes my perspective because we live in a culture that it's the big story, the crazy things someone said, or the massive action that got a lot of publicity. Those are the things that people are continually inundated with. It's the highlight from your vacation in the 10-second reel. That's not showing you the other 4 days of vacation. You're just captured your whole vacation in 10 seconds, and the majority of it probably wasn't that cool.
And yet, for the people on the vacation who are seeing that reel together, that brings so much life and
Right,
joy, even more joy and laughter than this big 100 million budget film
right, right.
might bring them.
And I love that you brought it back to, like, God created with words. There's so many different ways this conversation could go. Maybe that means I have to get you back on at some point for another conversation. Speaking into teenagers' lives and kind of transforming them, seeing what that their writing can be more than just, I'm going to write an essay about butterflies or whatever. I don't know why I thought of butterflies. It's spring when we're recording this, so I have new life on the mind.
You began to get the butterflies up there in frigid Minnesota.
Yes, about a week ago, at the time of recording this, about a week ago, we started having little beetles and bugs flying around, and I was like, insects are back. That means spring is here.
Well, I'm glad that spring can finally reach up north there.
Yeah, yeah. For our listeners, Josiah and I have this ongoing thing of whenever we're on a call together, one thing that I always bring up is, what's the weather like in Minnesota? Because a lot of times it's cold.
And look, a large part of it is that, like, there aren't many people that I can brag to about Pittsburgh weather. right? Like Pittsburgh weather is not great as in terms of
Yeah.
how weather goes in the US, but if I'm talking with a Minnesotan, I feel I can brag about Pittsburgh weather any day
That's
of the
fair.
week.
That's fair. So I love the idea of seeing something that in the example you provided, seeing writing as not just academic, but seeing a myriad of ways that it can be used and how God can work through it and bless the writer and those that read the writing. Even something as simple as like an encouraging like email or Facebook message or text message that's writing. That's a way that God can use that. And it makes me wonder, and we could spend hours speculating and trying to figure out and making like a list of all the different ways that maybe there are those things in our own lives that we view as only one way. Like writing is only essays and papers, but there are actually so many more ways that we can use that, whether it could be cooking, exercising, cleaning the house. Like who knows? I feel like there's it's a Pandora's box to pull from literature of good things that we could find.
And I think that's just one of the things that blows me away about God is that he's not only is able to, but he delights in using the common to bring us together with each other and ultimately to bring us closer to him and to see him for who he is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Josiah. It's been a pleasure, and I'm really excited to get this episode out so other people can hear it and see God in those common ways. Or if you're a writer listening to this, hopefully it encourages you in that pursuit as well.
Yep, well, it's been a delight to be on the podcast today. So thanks so much for having me on, Zach.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.